Blood pooled beneath Maxwell Blackwood's signature. Not real blood, but the crimson ink of the ornate fountain pen he always used, spreading across the document like an omen of the destruction to come. Eliza Hayes stared at the contract through tears of rage, her hands trembling as she gripped her phone so tightly her knuckles turned white. She could still hear the stranger's voice echoing in her ears. The old fool signed away everything he has, and he doesn't even know it. The revelation hit her with the force of a physical blow, stealing her breath and sending her heart racing. This wasn't just business. This was the deliberate destruction of a man who had shown her family nothing but kindness for 20 years. The man who had paid for her law degree. The man who had wept at her graduation as if she were his own daughter. And now, because of a single misdialed phone call that had reached her by pure chance, she alone knew he was about to lose everything he had spent a lifetime building. Thunder cracked outside the windows of her small apartment, mirroring the storm raging inside her chest. Rain lashed against the glass in furious sheets as if nature itself was responding to the injustice unfolding. Eliza pressed her forehead against the cool window pane, her reflection ghostly and determined in the lightning flashes. In that moment, she made a decision that would change both their lives forever. "They won't take this from him," she whispered, her breath fogging the glass. "Not while I'm alive to stop it." The magnitude of what she was up against crashed over her in waves. A sophisticated fraud orchestrated by people with money, power, and connections she couldn't begin to match. What chance did she have, the daughter of a housekeeper, barely a year out of law school, with nothing but an accidentally intercepted phone call as evidence? The odds were impossible. But impossible had never stopped Eliza Hayes before. She had been 7 years old when her father abandoned them, leaving her mother to raise her alone while working 3 jobs. She had been 12 when they'd nearly become homeless, saved only by Maria Hayes securing the position as head housekeeper at the Blackwood estate. She had been 16 when her high school counselor told her that girls like her didn't become lawyers, and 26 when she passed the bar exam with honors. Impossible was just another Tuesday for Eliza Hayes. With hands that had steadied now, fueled by a righteous fury that burned away her fear, she began to move with purpose. Her mother had access to the Blackwood Estate's security system for her work. The contract would be in his home office. She had less than 24 hours before the transfer clauses hidden in that document would activate, stripping Maxwell Blackwood of his company, his foundation, and the fortune he had planned to dedicate to cancer research after losing his wife to the disease just 8 months ago. Lightning illuminated her determined face as she grabbed her keys. The storm outside was nothing compared to the one she was about to unleash. "Hold on, Mr. Blackwood," she whispered, pulling on her coat. "I'm coming." As the torrential rain soaked her to the skin in the few steps between her car and the imposing front door of the Blackwood mansion, Eliza felt a strange calm settle over her. The security keypad glowed in the darkness, waiting for the code her mother had used thousands of times. Her fingers hovered over the numbers as doubt crept in. Was she really about to break into her mother's employer's home office based on a wrong number? Another crack of lightning illuminated the family photo displayed in the entryway: Maxwell Blackwood, his late wife Catherine, and their son James, who had died in a car accident 15 years ago. The family that had treated her mother with dignity when so many others had not. The man who had funded her education without ever expecting anything in return. Her fingers punched in the code with renewed conviction. The mansion was eerily silent as she made her way through familiar hallways, past rooms her mother had meticulously cleaned for decades. Every surface gleamed with care, the care her mother had put into maintaining this home even as its owner retreated further into grief and isolation after losing his wife. The thought of strangers taking this place, dismantling the last physical connections to the family Maxwell Blackwood had lost, fueled Eliza's determination. The door to his office stood before her, heavy oak, imposing. She had only been inside a handful of times, always with her mother, always with permission. Taking a deep breath, she turned the handle. The office was immaculate, as expected. Her mother's touch was evident in every polished surface. And there, on the massive desk that dominated the room, lay a leather portfolio embossed with the logo of Carson & Wilkes, the law firm that had handled Blackwood's affairs for decades. The contract would be inside. As Eliza reached for it, she heard the sound of a key in the front door. Maxwell Blackwood had come home early. Eliza's heart hammered against her ribs as the distant sound of the front door closing echoed through the mansion. Maxwell Blackwood wasn't supposed to be home for hours. The misdialed call had mentioned he would be trapped in meetings until evening. She had minutes, perhaps seconds, before he discovered her in his private office. With trembling hands, she flipped open the leather portfolio and began frantically scanning the contract. Years of law school had taught her to find the poison in a document quickly, the hidden clauses, the subtle traps disguised in legalese. Her eyes darted across page after page, searching for the mysterious page 17 mentioned in the call. Outside the office, footsteps approached, slow, measured, accompanied by the gentle tap of Maxwell Blackwood's signature cane. The sound had been part of the household's rhythm since Catherine's death, when grief seemed to age him overnight. Page 15, page 16. There. Page 17 contained what appeared to be standard language about subsidiary asset transfers, but Eliza immediately spotted the deception. Buried in the dense paragraph was a complete transfer of ownership clause, disguised as a routine authorization. The signature at the bottom wasn't just for the Singapore shipping contract renewal. It authorized the complete transfer of Blackwood Industries to a shell corporation she'd never heard of. The footsteps stopped just outside the door. Eliza looked up, the contract clutched in her hands. As the door swung open, Maxwell Blackwood stood in the doorway, his tall frame stooped with age and sorrow, his silver hair disheveled from the rain. His eyes widened at the sight of her. Miss Hayes. Confusion, then concern crossed his weathered face. "What are you doing in my office?" The carefully prepared explanation died in her throat. Instead, a different truth emerged. "They're stealing everything from you, Mr. Blackwood," she blurted out, her voice breaking. "Everything you've built. I had to stop it." He stared at her, his expression unreadable. Then, to her surprise, he closed the door behind him and crossed to the liquor cabinet in the corner. With practiced movements, he poured 2 fingers of scotch into a crystal tumbler. "Explain," he said simply, lowering himself into a leather chair. Eliza took a deep breath and revealed the hidden connection that had brought her here. The misdirected phone call, the gloating voice, the mention of page 17. As she spoke, she watched his face transform from confusion to disbelief, then to a cold fury she had never witnessed before. "Show me," he said when she finished, holding out his hand for the contract. She handed it over, pointing to the cleverly disguised clause. "Here and here. And on page 23, there's language that effectively transfers control of the charitable foundation as well." His eyes narrowed as he read, years of business acumen allowing him to immediately grasp what had nearly happened. When he looked up, the grief that had clouded his gaze for months had been replaced by something harder: determination. "Carson and Wilkes brought this to me," he said quietly. "My attorneys for 30 years. Eliza nodded slowly. The call mentioned an inside person, someone who knew your routines, your habits. Someone who knew you wouldn't read page 17 carefully. A bitter smile touched his lips. "Catherine always read every contract, every word. After he paused, composing himself. "After she passed, I've been less thorough." The admission seemed to cost him, this proud man acknowledging his vulnerability. Eliza suddenly felt like an intruder witnessing something too personal. But Maxwell Blackwood surprised her again. "You have your mother's loyalty," he said, his voice softening, "and your own courage. Why risk this for me? Breaking into my office could have cost you your law license before your career even began." The question caught her off guard. Why had she risked everything? The answer came to her with unexpected clarity. "Because 20 years ago, when my mother started working here, you paid for her health insurance even though the agency didn't require it. Because when I was 12 and had pneumonia, you sent your personal physician to our apartment. Because when my high school counselor told me not to bother applying to law school, you wrote me a recommendation letter. And because," her voice caught, "when I graduated, You sat in the audience next to my mother and stood up to cheer even though the program just said to hold applause until the end. Tears threatened, but she blinked them back. You've been more family to us than my own father ever was. I couldn't let them take everything from you. Something shifted in Maxwell Blackwood's expression. A softening, a recognition. He set down the contract and leaned forward, his eyes suddenly alert and focused in a way Eliza hadn't seen since before Catherine's death. Well then, he said, a hint of the formidable businessman he once was returning to his voice. We have work to do. He reached for the phone on his desk. First, we call my bank and freeze all accounts. Then we contact the SEC about Carson and Wilkes. But before any of that, he paused, his finger hovering over the keypad. I need to know who you think we can trust. Eliza straightened her shoulders, the weight of his trust settling on her like a mantle. The storm outside had begun to ease, rays of late afternoon sunlight breaking through the clouds and illuminating the office in golden light. In that moment, something unspoken passed between them. The maid's daughter and the millionaire, united by betrayal, connected by years of quiet kindnesses neither had fully acknowledged until now. I know exactly who to call, she said, pulling out her own phone. On the screen was a text from her law school classmate who now worked at the Attorney General's office. The one person she knew would answer immediately, no matter the hour or the request. Maxwell Blackwood watched her with newfound respect as she began to dial, his grief momentarily forgotten in the face of this unexpected alliance. And Miss Hayes, he said quietly as she waited for the call to connect. When this is over, I believe I may have a position for you at Blackwood Industries. It seems I'm in need of legal counsel I can actually trust. A small smile touched Eliza's lips as the line connected. The day had begun with a wrong number, but perhaps it would end with everything exactly where it belonged. The next 48 hours unfolded like a high-stakes chess match, with Eliza and Maxwell Blackwood strategically positioning their pieces against an opponent who still believed they held the winning hand. Eliza's former classmate at the Attorney General's office, Samantha Reyes, had arrived within the hour, bringing with her the full weight of legal authority and a team of financial crime specialists who worked through the night. We need to let them think the transfer is proceeding, Samantha had advised, her expression grim as she surveyed the fraudulent contract spread across Blackwood's mahogany desk. If they suspect we're onto them, they'll scatter, and we may never untangle who's behind this. Now, as dawn broke on the second day, Eliza stood in the Blackwood Industries executive conference room, surrounded by federal agents, forensic accountants, and a small circle of executives Maxwell Blackwood still trusted implicitly. The massive windows offered a panoramic view of the city skyline, the same city where Eliza had grown up watching these towers from afar, never imagining she would one day stand inside one, let alone be central to saving it. They'll be here in 20 minutes, Maxwell Blackwood announced, entering the room with more vigor than Eliza had seen in months. The shock of betrayal had seemingly stripped away the fog of grief that had enveloped him since Catherine's death. Are we ready? Samantha nodded, adjusting the hidden microphone beneath Eliza's blazer. The blazer Maxwell had insisted on having delivered to her that morning, along with the rest of a professional wardrobe he deemed suitable for the occasion. It hung perfectly on her frame, as if tailored specifically for her, which Eliza suspected it had been. Remember, Samantha said, meeting Eliza's eyes, we need them to explicitly confirm their intent. Get them to explain the mechanism of the fraud, who's involved, how deep it goes. Eliza nodded, her mouth dry. And Mr. Blackwood? I'll play my part, the older man said with a grim smile. The doddering old fool they think I've become. The steel in his voice belied the role he was about to perform. They took their positions, Eliza in an adjacent office with the surveillance team, Maxwell Blackwood alone in the conference room, appearing to review documents with the distracted air of a man who had already lost without knowing it. The stage was set. At exactly 9 a.m., the elevator doors opened, and three figures emerged. Leading the group was Charles Carson himself, senior partner at Carson & Wilkes, his expensive suit and confident stride projecting the image of absolute legal authority. Behind him followed Blackwood's CFO, Martin Greaves, a man who had worked alongside Maxwell for 15 years. The third figure was unknown to Eliza, a younger man with sharp eyes that missed nothing. "They're here," Samantha whispered unnecessarily as they watched the monitors. "The third man is probably the buyer's representative." Eliza's hands clenched into fists as she watched Carson approach Maxwell with practiced sympathy, clasping the older man's shoulder as if offering comfort rather than betrayal. The hidden microphones picked up every word. "Maxwell, we've processed all the paperwork. By end of business today, the transition will be complete. You won't have to worry about any of this anymore." The double meaning in his words made Eliza's blood boil. 20 years of trust, exploited. A grieving man targeted at his most vulnerable. "Thank you, Charles," Maxwell replied. His voice deliberately weakened, hesitant. "I just have a few questions about the Singapore contract before we proceed." Carson exchanged a quick glance with Greaves. "Of course, but there's really nothing to worry about. Standard renewal, as we discussed." "Actually," Maxwell said, shuffling papers with apparent confusion, "I can't seem to find page 17. It seems to be missing from my copy." The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Carson's smile remained fixed, but his eyes hardened. "I'm sure it's there somewhere. Nothing important on that page anyway. Just standard legal language." The trap was set. Eliza's heart thundered as she watched Maxwell Blackwood transform before her eyes, his stooped posture straightening, his confused expression clearing like storm clouds parting to reveal the formidable force of nature beneath. "Interesting you should say that, Charles," he said, his voice suddenly strong and clear. "Because according to my new legal counsel, page 17 contains the most important language in the entire document." The door to the conference room opened, and Eliza stepped through, followed by Samantha and 2 federal agents. The look on Charles Carson's face, shock giving way to dawning horror, was something Eliza knew she would remember for the rest of her life. "Mr. Carson," Samantha said, her badge held high, "I'm Special Agent Reyes with the Attorney General's office. We'd like to ask you some questions about certain irregularities in this contract." What followed was nothing short of spectacular. Martin Greaves, seeing the federal agents, immediately crumbled, offering to cooperate in exchange for leniency. The unknown third man attempted to flee but was detained in the lobby. And Charles Carson, the architect of the scheme, maintained his innocence even as his carefully constructed fraud unraveled around him. By sunset, the full extent of the conspiracy had been exposed. Carson had orchestrated a complex scheme to transfer Blackwood's assets to a network of shell companies, using his intimate knowledge of Maxwell's distracted grief to slip the fraudulent clauses past him. The betrayal cut deeper with each revelation. Trusted employees, longtime associates, all willing to profit from the downfall of a man they had pretended to respect. As the federal agents led the last of the conspirators away, Eliza found herself alone with Maxwell Blackwood in his office, the city lights beginning to twinkle below them as dusk fell. "My wife would have liked you," he said suddenly, breaking the contemplative silence between them. Catherine had no patience for pretense. She judged people by their actions, not their words. He turned to face Eliza fully. "Neither the wealth of your birth nor the circumstances of your upbringing determined your character, Miss Hayes. You alone did that." Eliza felt tears prick at her eyes, exhaustion and emotion finally catching up to her. "I just did what anyone would do." "No," Maxwell said firmly. "You did what very few would have the courage to do. You risked everything, your career, your reputation, for someone else's benefit." He gestured toward the leather chair across from his desk. "Please sit down. We have something important to discuss." Hesitantly, Eliza took the offered seat, feeling strange to be sitting rather than standing in this office where her mother had dusted and vacuumed for 2 decades. "I meant what I said about offering you a position," Maxwell continued, his expression serious. "Not out of gratitude, though I am profoundly grateful, but because you've demonstrated exactly the kind of integrity and intelligence I want at Blackwood Industries." He slid a folder across the desk toward her. Inside was an employment contract, not for a junior position, but for Chief Compliance Officer, with a salary that made Eliza's eyes widen. "Sir, I don't have the experience for this," she stammered. "Experience can be gained," he replied simply. "Character is either present or it isn't. Besides," a small smile played at his lips, "I think you've proven your ability to identify fraudulent contracts." A laugh escaped her, surprising them both. After the tension of the past 2 days, it felt like a release. "There's something else," Maxwell said, his tone softening. "Something Catherine and I discussed before she passed." He opened his desk drawer and withdrew another document, this one bound in blue leather. "We never had children of our own, not after James died. We had discussed adoption, but time got away from us." He passed the document to Eliza, who opened it with trembling fingers. It was the amendment to his will, dated just days before Catherine Blackwood's death. Her eyes caught on a single line that made her breath catch. "Hereby establish a trust for Eliza Maria Hayes, whom we have come to regard as family." "Catherine insisted," Maxwell explained gently, watching emotions play across Eliza's face. "She said we may not have been blessed with a daughter by birth, but we had been given one through the blessing of circumstance. Your mother brought you into our lives, Eliza, and now you've saved mine." Tears flowed freely down Eliza's cheeks now, too powerful to contain. The document in her hands represented not just financial security but something far more precious: recognition, belonging, family. "I don't know what to say," she whispered. "Say you'll accept both offers," Maxwell replied, a warmth in his eyes that had been absent since Catherine's passing. "The position because you've earned it, and the trust because it would honor Catherine's wishes, and because I've come to believe she was right." Outside the windows of Blackwood Tower, the city sparkled like scattered diamonds against the night sky. Inside, something broken began to heal. A grieving man finding purpose again, and a young woman discovering that family could be found in the most unexpected places. The wrong number that had started everything no longer seemed like chance, but something more like fate. "Yes?" Eliza said finally, wiping away tears and extending her hand across the desk. "To both." Maxwell Blackwood shook her hand firmly, the gesture sealing more than a business arrangement. "Then welcome to the family, Miss Hayes. It seems you've been part of it all along."